Let's start by inviting our first speaker, Mr. Krishnan Subramanian, Director, OpenShift Strategy, Red Hat Incorporated, as he takes us through his presentation on demystifying DevOps. Mr. Subramanian, please.
Good afternoon. The big problem starting a session after lunch is I won't know whether you are yawning because of the food or because of what I'm talking here. But I'll try to do my best to keep you engaged in this topic. The theme of this event is transformation. We have been, you must have listened to many talks about IT transformation because of the newer tools that are coming to the market or technological trends that's happening right now. But I'm going to talk about transformation that's coming, not just because of the tools, but also because of the cultural change that is happening inside IT organizations. So I'm going to talk about a new transformation called DevOps that's sweeping the IT landscape. It is changing how organizations are doing IT, and it actually makes enterprise much more interesting than any time in the past. So how many of you here know about DevOps? Good. It's a small number, and they are my colleagues. So I think I will sort of I can engage the rest of the people with somewhat introductory talk about DevOps. In this talk, I will give some historical context, talk about how IT was before this transformation started happening, and introduce DevOps, try to give some kind of a definition, and then talk about DevOps from an IT tools perspective. Then I will highlight some of the considerations you should have if your organization is going to embrace DevOps. And finally, I'll conclude saying that DevOps is the best thing that happens to enterprise IT. Let's take a step back, put some context to what I'm going to introduce today. Before DevOps, the life in enterprise was too slow. Like it's something similar to what we have in our personal lives. Once upon a time, like probably in the mid 20th century or something, life was very slow and it was peaceful. Then internet came along, it completely changed how we live. Then mobile devices came along, it made life even more hectic. Then now we have wearable technologies, so it's changing our life completely. The same kind of trend is happening in enterprises. So initially they had a really symbiotic relationship where developers and operations were not really worried about getting things faster to the market. They had enough leverage to sort of have their own way of doing things. Then internet happened, it sort of nudged them to sort of like act fast. Nudged IT to deliver things fast. Then mobile came into existence inside enterprises. It sort of completely pushed enterprises to a completely new way of doing things. Before DevOps, business users always wanted things fast. So they are a totally different breed. They cannot do things slowly. So they always wanted to meet their customers' need because they are the ones who go and meet the customers. They are the ones who sort of like take feedback from the customers, and they have to face them and answer them every day. But then they started putting pressure on developers. Developers then developers were doing a slowly different kind of approach to developing applications. Once business users started pushing developers to act fast, then they changed their way of doing things. Before initially developers used something called a waterfall methodology to develop applications. So it's a long drawn process. It started with collecting the technical requirements and then doing the design, then writing the code, and finally pushing it to testing and production deployment. It was pretty slow for the needs of business users, so they started pushing them to act fast, churn out features fast. Then developers got together and started embracing agile technologies. So with Agile, they sort of cut down the application development process into smaller, manageable chunks. So instead of waiting to develop the entire application, push it to production, they started pushing chunks of code ready for production. They sort of, instead of having long cycles, they started using short sprints. So it got the developers to meet the needs of business users. But finally, developers, when they push out the code to operations, it didn't go anywhere. So this is a slide that sort of talks about the difference between waterfall methodology and agile methodology. In short, what it says is the agile methods help developers push features business users wanted much faster than what was happening before. So it made business users happy, but they were not entirely satisfied because it only solved part of the problem. That is, developers doing things fast. You need to have the code applications deployed in production to make them completely happy and also help them meet the needs of their own customers. The roadblock was operations. I wouldn't, it's much easier to say, hey, operations are the root cause of all the problems in enterprise IT. But I wouldn't say that. They are always under pressure. They are always under pressure to keep the applications running. They are always under pressure to keep the production environment reliable and stable. And with the newer technologies coming into picture, the environment is completely out of control. They have multiple different technologies in their data centers. They have to make sure that all of them are working very well and staying up to sort of serve the applications. Because of this pressure, because of the environment being out of control, they always resist any change. Developers became agile. They pushed out features. Instead of pushing out features application once every year, they started pushing out features in a matter of weeks. But business operations were not ready to put them in production because their life was already miserable. They couldn't, they don't want to mess up with that and sort of like get them into more trouble. So there was always a wall of confusion or a wall of mistrust that existed between developers and operations. When the management comes and asks IT about what's happening, they point their fingers towards developers. Then they go and talk to the developers, why you're not doing things, then doing things right, then they point the fingers towards operation. There was a mistrust, there was lack of communication between them. But there are many reasons to that. Part of the reason is in the traditional IT world, there were some belief systems that were the core of how they did IT. They always thought that applications should be reliable and stable. They always thought that developers shouldn't have access to production environment. They always thought that operations people play no role in the application design process. They always thought that pushing applications to production rapidly is a bad idea. So this sort of led to a situation where IT was seen as a gatekeeper or someone who's putting blocks on innovation. And this, along with the pressure on developers to add more features, sort of brought the mistrust to such a level in some organizations. Before I joined Red Hat, I was an analyst, so I used to talk to many different organizations about how their IT and developer teams are doing. So in some cases, the situation was totally bad. It was totally out of control. Management had no clue how they can deal with it. So always when you narrow down what is happening, it all goes down to traditional ways of doing IT and operations, trying to protect their jobs as well as protect the business interests of the organization by believing that reliability and stability should be the key mantra for doing things. So this kind of mistrust, it sort of worked well in the traditional world when things were slow, but it is not working well in today's world where business users and their own customers, they want results fast. Now we have mobile devices in our pocket and we have internet everywhere. So they need contextual information and they need everything available immediately, and they want. And in fact, it's not a bad thing to ask for. And this kind of transformation has really helped organization increase their bottom line, as well as have competitive advantage over some of their competitors. So this is not a bad thing. It's not. I wouldn't say that business users are being unreasonable, but the thing is, their push was accelerated with the development of newer technologies. So traditional IT thinking was clearly not working in enterprises, and the net result of this kind of confusion or distrust between developers and operation is that line of users were getting frustrated, and they couldn't meet the needs of their own customers. So in order to handle this, we need to think differently. Before we go into how we can think differently about it, I want to put some more context into what pushed IT to think about DevOps. Cloud computing came. When cloud computing became the norm, startups were taking advantage of cloud to get things done fast. Startups, they didn't have money to have a separate development team and a separate operations team. So they figured a way out to sort of get their developers trained in some of the operations thing and manage with the smaller operations team to get things done fast. So they thought, okay, cloud computing is an awesome way to push things faster and make it available to the users. But that is not really the case. If you still have the traditional way of doing things, doing IT, if you still have operations controlling everything, even with cloud, the improvement you will gain is only iterative. It is not going to completely transform the organizations. So you need to find some other way to do it. So then came the idea of DevOps, which is now sweeping organizations from startups to large enterprises. So before if I have to introduce what DevOps is, if you put a group of 10 experts into a room and ask them to define DevOps, you'll have 12 different definitions. I'm pretty sure even all of us here who know something about DevOps will have a slightly different way of looking at it. It's like how cloud was defined when cloud came into existence. Like people had different ideas. Finally, we standardized on a definition. It will happen with DevOps too. But these are still early stages. But the thing is, we cannot wait for the definition to be standardized before we can embrace it. So it is time to start thinking about DevOps if you want your organization to be agile and if you want to transform your organization and make it competitive in this globalized economy. The easiest way to define DevOps is through tools. But I sort of differ from that kind of a definition. I think tools are important, but DevOps is more of a cultural change that happens inside the organizations, resulting in change in how change in the processes. First, you need to build some trust between developers and operations. You need to make them understand and appreciate what the other side is doing. Once you do that, it will have a change in the organizational processes. There is no single recipe to do it. I cannot say, hey, this is the way you can get DevOps done in your organization. It depends on the nature of your existing organization. It depends on your needs. There are so many things you need to take into account before you can find a way to embrace DevOps. So it's a cultural change that brings operations and developers closer to each other so that they can go and meet the needs of line of business. There are some people who define DevOps just from a narrow domain of development and operations. I sort of differ from that kind of thinking. And in my opinion, DevOps is not just about aligning the goals of development and operations, it is also aligning their goals with the business team so that there is an organizational wide alignment. Otherwise, any improvement that results because of some cultural change within some part of the organization is going to be very iterative. So if you need to have an organizational wide alignment. But just the cultural change is not enough. You can decide, or you can even force people at gunpoint to change the way they do things. But the tools doesn't help them. The friction is going to continue, and that lack of trust between these different teams it is also going to continue. So you need to get the change in culture aligned with the right set of tools. If you don't provide those tools, then you are in trouble. That's where companies like Red Hat come into picture and sort of help you give the right tool while also bringing the change in the culture. So in short, DevOps should bring the development and operations closer to each other, so that instead of both of them acting in silos, you have something like this. You start from idea and go to code and to production in matter of seconds, days, or weeks, instead of months, years, or even more. So that is the idea behind DevOps. I am not giving a categorical definition to DevOps here. That is on purpose, because it's still early days with DevOps. So saying that this is DevOps is not the right thing to do. I won't be giving a honest definition there. I'll be sort of pushing my own biases there. So I sort of gave a background on what DevOps is. Now I want to connect to the tools, put some perspective from IT tools point of view. You can embrace, as an organization, you can bring in the cultural change and embrace DevOps. Then you need the tools. What kind of tools are we going to use? You can approach DevOps from two ways. One is what I call as IaaS plus. It is infrastructure as a service plus additional set of tools. Then the other thing is called PaaS, platform as a service. I'm going to be talking about OpenShift 2 hours from now. So I'll be talking about PaaS a little more in more detail in my second talk. So there are two ways in which you can approach DevOps. The first way is IaaS plus. This is the one that came into existence because of the startup world. Startups, they found Amazon Web Services. They found a way to sort of get things done fast. They found a way for the developers to work with the operations and get things done. So the IaaS plus was actually the result of startups embracing the DevOps concept. So they control the life cycle from OS and above. They sort of use scripts like Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, or some other script to sort of set up the environment on top of infrastructure and automate all those things, including scaling and all that. Then this works well if your environment is very simple. Probably, let's say for a startup, it might work well because their needs are not very complex. So they could easily manage by using tools like Puppet and Chef on top of infrastructure as a service. But for enterprises, if they try to take this approach, if they buy an infrastructure as a service solution and try to use Puppet or Chef or other tools to automate middleware and application lifecycle tools, it's going to add complexity. So complexity you can manage. Netflix has been doing it. But why do you want to complicate your life when there is an easier way to do it? That's where PaaS comes into picture. PaaS standardizes everything from on top of which applications can be deployed. You don't have to manage everything from operating system and above. It just gives you a completely automated, standardized environment. Gives you an API to which you could push your application. So it's because of the standardization, you cut down a lot of errors that creates confusion between operations and developers. For example, in the traditional world, one of the reasons for the mistrust between operations and development team is when the developers run their applications, they have an environment set up for them. They use configuration management tools to sort of set up that environment, and it works perfectly. Sometimes it may even work well in the test environment and QE environment. But production has a completely different kind of setup. So that's where everything fails. So if you want to bring down the mistrust between development and operations, you need to make sure that these kind of errors doesn't creep in how you do IT today. So PaaS, by standardizing it and automating it and taking the abstraction to a higher notch, It's making it much easy for IT to deliver almost similar environments across development, test, and production. That way, they cut down on things that could cause friction between both teams. And in the case of IaaS plus approach, you need to have developers who understands operations, and then you need to have operations team who know coding. So that's the way you could bring that kind of a synergy between both the teams. With PaaS, that worked very well in the startup world, which is mostly based in Silicon Valley. They have talent that they could hire. Whereas for the rest of the world, getting a developer who knows operations or getting operations guys, system admins who know coding, it's pretty expensive. Why do you want to spend more money when you can get things done by keeping this separation between operations and developers in terms of talent and still getting the same or better benefits? So that's where PaaS and DevOps becomes a critical thing. And with DevOps and PaaS, developers focus on just writing the code and pushing it to testing and then to the production. Quality engineers focus on what they are good at. They don't have to worry about how to set up an environment to test the application that's being pushed by the developers. And operation people need not worry about, hey, what kind of error that could have cropped into production that is stopping this application from performing properly. Because they know they have set up a standardized environment similar to what is there in production. So developers coded in that environment, they pushed it to testing. Testing people did their tests in the same kind of environment. They then pushed it to, when it comes to production, for most cases, the application should work flawlessly. I'm not saying that it's a magic pill that sort of makes this transition seamless. It just cuts down on the configuration errors that could come in because of differences in configuration between different environments. So you could have a deployment pipeline which is standardized, and you can even automate most of the functions. That's where DevOps and PaaS shine compared to the IaaS plus approach. So whenever we embrace a newer technology or newer trends, we need to sort of measure some of the key performance indicators so that you could convince your boss that it's worth investing in these technologies or worth changing the culture. So IT departments have their own parameters to think about, things like the speed of deployment or the frequency with which you could push the changes to the production, mean time to recover, and all that. So they're all good for technical people, but if you have to go convince your boss and say that, hey, we need to invest this much money on the tools that will help us embrace DevOps in a much better way, you need some parameters that sort of goes beyond all those technical things. So I have sort of identified two parameters which could tell your boss, hey, it's worth investing. So one is the ratio of revenue producing tickets to non-revenue producing tickets. In the past, if you look at the help desk system, most of the tickets that comes in are bug fixes, requests for bug fixes and things like that. So they are not actually revenue producing tickets. Most of them are put there to sort of get things going properly. So that also occupied the time of IT and development teams. So with DevOps, you are cutting down on errors and all that. So one way to look at the impact of DevOps is to see if the number of non-revenue producing tickets had come down. If it has come down, then it's a pretty good KPI to sort of go tell your boss. Then the resources and time freed up by cutting down on the errors can be used to build a new feature or even build a new product, depending on your organization. So I call this as a good measure of innovation. And another thing which you could look at while trying to convince your boss is the return of investment. There are tools available that sort of compass the cost associated with traditional IT with all the newer cloud technologies. You could use them. Even at OpenShift, Red Hat, if you go to OpenShift.com, there is a link somewhere in there which will let you find the cost savings associated with using OpenShift. So that will help you sort of get a approximate guess on the cost savings, and you will be able to convince your manager on the need to embrace DevOps and PaaS. Before I sort of highlight some of the final consideration, did I make a compelling argument about DevOps? No? So you want me to keep talking about DevOps more? How many of you at least want your organization to embrace DevOps? Forget about whether you are in a position to push it. How many of you want your organization to embrace DevOps? So, okay. So, do you think that that's the right way to for IT to go about doing things, or do you think you want to do it just because it's that trendy thing to do? I'll ask you.
Increase stress levels.
On the developer side, they say it's easier to do it. They have this kind of setup.
Exactly. The developer shouldn't be worrying about all the operational complexities, right? So, yeah, I agree. And how many of you think, from the group who thinks DevOps is the right way to think, how many of you think probably marrying PaaS with DevOps is the smart thing to do? Have you faced scenarios where the configuration management errors completely mess up your production deployment and created nightmares? Yeah. So yeah, definitely like having a standardized automated way of doing things at a higher abstraction will cut down on errors. I'm not saying it will eliminate errors, it will cut down on errors and makes you benefit from DevOps even more than having a complex environment. So before I sort of conclude, I want to talk about some of the things you should consider if your organization is going to embrace DevOps. One is on the cultural side. You need to bring in the cultural change. Without cultural change, just having the right PaaS, it's not going to help you. Any improvement is going to be iterative. So there should be cultural change aided by the right tools. So first focus on cultural change. Bring all the stakeholders in your organization to the table. Get developers, operations and line of business to work together. Define their goals. So that once the business users talk about their needs, developers and ops people can get together to see how they can meet that need better. And make developers and operations understand each other's difficulties. That is the critical thing to do before you can bring in the cultural change. That is the only way you could bring down the mistrust. And it might involve some process change, but that should come from developers and operations working together. So these goals defined by business and developers and operation should be the backbone of your IT strategy. Then when it comes to tools, pick the right tool for your IT needs. I cannot say, hey, this is the right tool for all organizations. It depends on the organization. So like you need to talk to your development team and IT team to figure out what will be the right tool. You should try to avoid complexity as much as possible. This is where I come in and say, hey, get a PaaS solution. Because it standardizes everything and reduces complexity. You don't need a Netflix kind of complex environment. For most organizations, don't need it. So for organizations that need that kind of an environment, they could think about IaaS plus approach, but PaaS helps most of the organizations, especially enterprises. Ensure that these tools are standardized across all the teams, starting with development all the way to production. And give developers an easy deployment interface. That is key. You have to make developers feel comfortable with the environment. If you complicate their lives, it's going to we are going back to the good old days. And the key thing is measurement, monitoring, measurement, and feedback. Make sure everything you do is monitored, everything you do is measured, everything you do is conveyed across all the stakeholders involved in it. It means development teams, operations team, and in some cases you may have to take it to the line of business to figure out if there is another way to do things, or if there is a way they will change their needs, so that you can sort of get another way to get things done. So these are the key consideration you should have from the tools side. That's all I have about DevOps, but I would love to talk to you about DevOps, about PaaS going forward. Not just after this event, I am available till evening, and you can come and talk to me. I can even go into details of some of the use cases. But you can reach me on all these coordinates, and I would love to continue the dialogue. Any questions? If there is no question, probably I didn't convey well enough, or probably you're still sleeping. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Subramanian. Great timing.